Welcome back to the Next Level podcast. A couple weeks ago, we were able to attend the HITS Canine Conference in New Orleans. And holy cow, were the beignets at Café Du Monde to die for. If you missed out, I feel bad for you because it was like a culinary experience, a cultural experience. There was music. The atmosphere was amazing. But the conference itself was pretty awesome as well. You know, being around 1,200 canine handlers from all over the world and, being in classes with instructors that are covering so many different topics, whether it's science or detection or how to deploy a dog in certain situations. I really enjoyed myself, just being a student and soaking everything in. And today we sit down with one of those instructors who happens to be one of the owners as well, Ted Daus. Ted was involved in 2 Supreme Court decisions, Supreme Court canine cases that really shaped the industry on number 1, canine reliability, that's Florida v. Harris, and whether or not a dog could sniff a door seam of a home to develop probable cause, and that's Florida v. Jardines. So we get to speak about both of those cases, kind of a behind the scenes look on what his responsibility was for those cases. And of course, we talked about HITS and the inception of HITS and why it started, and it was a fascinating conversation. Ted could talk so eloquently about so many different things. It's just really cool to be able to sit down with him and have this conversation. So without further ado, please welcome Ted Daus. Ted, give us an idea of your background. I know it's pretty extensive.
Yeah, I graduated law school in 91, went into the prosecutor's office in Broward County, which is Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Mm-hmm. Won't belabor you with all the ins and outs of my career, but eventually made it into the drug trafficking unit.
Nice.
And I spent the vast 22 years of my 30-year career in drug trafficking, which led me into a partial push me in the direction of narcotics, canine, search and seizure, and the use of the dog.
Nice.
I taught law school at night for about 8 years. Some friends of mine and myself co-authored the book Canines in the Courtroom, which a lot of people read and utilize. I did all the narcotic search and seizure section on it, and probably one of the, I don't know if it's the well-known, least known, but when they find out about it, I participated in 2 United States Supreme Court arguments, Florida versus Harris and Florida versus Jardines. I won't fool anybody. A guy by the name of Greg Garr is an excellent lawyer. Florida hired him to actually argue it at the podium before the court.
Wow.
But as I tell people, I got to sit at the adult table for Thanksgiving before the United States Supreme Court and helped out as much as possible related to those 2 issues, which was one was dog reliability, that was Harris.
Yep.
And the other was dog sniffing houses, which was Jardines.
Yeah.
And if you want to win a free beer, Jardines is actually Haitian, and the J's are H's.
Yeah.
So everybody like me would say Jardines because it's a J.
Yeah.
And if you're at a bar, you probably want to say, and you meet a Haitian individual, he would correct you and say, that is Jardines.
Jardines.
Yeah, so that was fun. Watch out what you wish for, because I did it. I'm a member of the United States Supreme Court Bar.
Nice.
And I'd never done anything like that before. So public speaking is pretty easy for me as a prosecutor and an educator. Writing was not my forte. So I wrote 2 amicus briefs. That's basically, hey, will you please hear this issue?
Yeah.
And then they did grant us hearing both of those cases. And then I wrote 2 merit briefs on the position that I think the court should take.
Beautiful.
And I learned my weakness, legal writing and research. I think I got a B in law school in that, but I learned that when you actually write for the United States Supreme Court, it's a lot tougher. I'll be honest with you, I would probably not do it again.
Really?
Well, I've crossed the bucket list off. If you count them both, I've done it twice.
Yeah.
And other than if they gave me the opportunity maybe to argue the actual oral argument, I might take them up on that. But the writing portion was a lot tougher than I thought it would be. They stand to be very unique in United Supreme Court history. If you count Mr. Garr, he was a law clerk for Justice Rehnquist for a long time, and then he argued the case, and it was, and I could be wrong at the time, but it was something like his 32nd and 33rd oral argument before the court.
Yeah.
And he, at the time, this goes back 10 years or so, he was one of, I believe, 7 or 8 cases / lawyers, because they only hear 2 arguments when they hear arguments, and they don't hear them, they hear like 6 or 8 a month, but when they hear them, they only hear 2 a day.
Wow.
So if, say, they're scheduled oral argument for Tuesday and Thursday next week, there's going to be 2 on Tuesday and 2 on Thursday. That's it.
I didn't know that.
And so he's one of, I think at the time was 7 or 8 lawyers, it could have changed in the past 10 years, to actually argue both cases, both issues on the same day and not leave the table.
So way.
He argued like the 9 o'clock hearing and the 10 o'clock hearing, and he didn't have to move a piece of paper. Because and it was a little funny. You can tell that John Roberts has a little bit of humor, because the first thing was very formal, oyez, Supreme Court, and the whole get up, and God save the Queen and whatever else, and then all of ye having coming before the court, and then they call the case, and he introduces himself, and this is who he is and who he represents, and both cases were argued. Defense attorney gets something argued. They take a recess, and they call the next case. And, of course, Mr. Garr is going to argue them both. And he stands up and he says, Greg Garr, now on behalf of the state of Florida. And Rehnquist interrupts and says, Mr. Garr, long time no see. Because he was just at the table making an oral argument 15, 20 minutes ago. And it was a little humorous. It shows you that the court can have a little bit of humor.
That's good.
But, yeah, so that was, being a part of that was probably, I was a pretty moderately scheduled speaker across the country, but then having to participate and be that intimately involved in 2 United States Supreme Court cases that both involved narcotics dogs at least, kind of vaulted me into a different stratosphere.
Well, they're huge. Both of those cases were huge.
Oh, no. Well, if we had not won Harris, every narcotics dog handler in the country would be having a 4-hour motion to suppress, where they would have to go through, say you work in your dog for 6 years. You'd have to go through 6 years of records, explain the entries. And if you were a dog handler, if anybody, I don't know, I'm dating myself, but if you were a dog handler, let's say, 12 to 15 years ago, and you maybe still work in your 3rd dog or something, you'll remember probably having to calculate statistics. Where I had an alert with actual drugs found.
Right.
I had an alert with like marijuana shake or something, and then we count that as a positive. Then you had an alert, which we used to throw into a category, an alert with an admission. So you find no dope, but the person says, I smoked a joint about an hour ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you had alerts that were, people generally probably call them now in the world, non-productive.
Yep.
Which means the dog would alert, but you wouldn't find anything.
Yeah.
And you'd have to calculate, well, my dog was 82% last year, and thank God for Harris. It got rid of all the percentages, all the calculations. Your dog is this percentage right, because the old false alert term, which for those of you that are out there, I worked very hard on Harris to get rid of false alerts, and I think they're predominantly gone. Every once in a while when I lecture around the country, I find a handler or 2 that haven't caught on, and I hit them in the back of the head with a frying pan to tell them, please get that out of your records or out of your testimony, simply because the United States Supreme Court, on a 9-0 reversal of the Florida Supreme Court, held that what do you want to call it, non-productive, where you don't find tangible, statistically you can't count that, because you have no idea whether the dog was right or wrong.
Right.
Because your dog is an odor dog. It shouldn't shock anybody out there that your dog could alert to the odor of narcotics that were recently smoked, recently sold and removed, whatever the scenario is. Could be in your clothing because you're driving a car and your dog smells it, or it could be actually well hidden in a trap that you don't find or something. And they said, well, it doesn't make the dog wrong. So the attorney saying, well, your dog alerted outside the passenger door, but you don't find any dope in the car. The attorneys would say false alert, mistake, error.
Yeah.
And you'd have to calculate how many, according to them, and I'm using air quotes, errors or false alerts you would have. And the Supreme Court said nada. We're going to look at real-world training where you know the dog can be right or wrong, your weekly maintenance training, and we're going to look at like certification from a standard recognized body, and they should know they have no interest in your dog.
Right.
I do find every once in a while, so everybody is out there, don't write me letters or send me emails and tell me that I'm bad, but there are a few departments out there I'm trying to push in the right direction. You should not certify your own dog.
Yeah, of course.
You know, like the sergeant of the unit
Right.
should, or don't be friends with your neighbor. You know, Jefferson County should not be certifying my neighbor in Oldham County.
Yes.
And Oldham County should not be. You should really go to, and I'm not in favor of any of them, but, you know, USPCA, NPCA, NAPWater, NNDDA,
Yep.
California Narcotics Association, FLECA, the Florida, whatever. Everybody's got one, whether it's one of the big national ones or it's a state one, but you really want somebody independent evaluating your dog once a year.
A third
and
party.
Your dog goes like 10 for 10 in certification, and you go on your way. And then if you don't do well, you know, they don't certify you, and you come back, you know, 60 days later and you work on it and you get, you know, recertified. But they seem to like that, and they acknowledge that you can tell the right and the wrong call by the handler because there's somebody over there that knows where the dope is. It's blind to the handler.
Yeah.
And they like that idea of independent verification, certification from some entity.
Yeah.
But it can't be John, the truck driver for, you know, ABC Freight, and on weekends he certifies dogs, because they do talk about it being a bona fide recognized organization with standards and SOPs and things of that nature. So as long as you're doing something that, you know, with a bona fide organization, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. One of the things I always tell the guys that I'm responsible for training is, if I'm your trainer on paper, then I can't certify you. I certify through an organization, one of the ones that you mentioned. And quite frankly, it's very easy to just call somebody else and say, hey, I have these, whoever. I know you may come out from out of state or far away. I prefer it. You don't know any of my guys. You don't even know me. But we need to get certified by someone.
Well, I'll make all my police officers chuckle. This, in the world of the Supreme Court, which they would like you to avoid, is that if somebody filed a complaint against your IA sergeant, and your IA sergeant investigated himself, cleared himself, and found that the IA against himself was unfounded.
Right.
So, yeah, that they want to avoid that.
So let's go back to Florida v. Harris, because it's such an important case. It's a really groundbreaking case, and it was such a huge win for our industry. So I hate to say summarize it for us, because it kind of cheapens all the work you did. But for those who may not be familiar with the case, could you summarize it?
Sure. The bottom line is the case came out of Florida. And they were ruling, just like I talked about, a statistical analysis by going over years of records and coming up with 79% correct, 91% correct. And those were all real world.
So there's actual deployments that they were taking statistics from, not training.
Correct. And they were using the false alert scenario as a part of the, as a negative.
Right.
And we already talked about it's an odor dog, and there's no real negative in the real world because you don't know the surrounding circumstances.
Of course.
And so we argued in 4 of the 5 district courts in the state of Florida and lost all 4.
Wow.
Then it went to the Florida Supreme Court, and we lost 5-2.
Wow.
That you, as in, like, you had to do the statistical analysis. And then we begged the United States Supreme Court to hear it. And the good thing about the state of Florida, which was fortunate that the issue arose in the state of Florida, is we have a unique Article 1, Section 12 section of our Florida Constitution that says that all Florida courts shall follow, and in the legal term, shall means mandatory.
Of course.
Is that they shall follow the United States Supreme Court in all matters related to search and seizure.
Okay.
So our Supreme Court, when it comes to search and seizure, has to answer to follow federal law and answer to the United States Supreme Court.
Was there a precedent?
Not all states have that.
Right. Was there a precedent set by the Supreme Court that you all would?
No. Dog reliable. There were only dog cases, like
Right.
United States versus Place.
Right.
There was Illinois versus Caballos, but there were no. That was, you can utilize a dog at a traffic stop, but depending on time for any basic reason. There was no dog reliability, so it was a case of first impression for them. And if you think about it, you know, calculating it, There were 3 judge panels, so if you do, we lost 4 out of 5. So we're 12 judges into saying no, and there were 5 of the 7 Supreme Courts. I'm 17 judges into saying no, you're wrong. And then we went up to the United States Supreme Court, which is very validating when they go 9-0 and they reverse. So not to be humorous, which I try to be humorous sometimes, but I mean, if I can get somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, God bless the rest of her soul, was a very liberal Supreme Court justice, and she was able to vote that it really get away from the real world because it's not reliable statistically. And you should look at your initial training when your dog goes into service. So if you do 4 or 5 or 600 hours when you buy your dog, and then I call it your weekly maintenance training, and then your yearly certification. If you look at all those areas, and you that's where the reliability should come from, because you can actually determine whether the handler and the dog and the call by the handler was correct or not. And they said, so you get away from the field in real world deployments and you go into certification and training for reliability. And as we all know, I mean, I'm not an ostrich with my head in the sand. I would assume that most handlers would say my dog is really good every Wednesday night. My dog was good after 500 hours of training, and and when I go to certification with one of the agencies, there's 10 hides and 10 fines, and my dog every year goes 10 for 10. So it really, and if you hit that standard, then the case actually says you can presume, or the trial court judge can presume, the dog's reliability. And then it's up to the defense attorney to then shoot the reliability down. Now they can go out and hire a defense attorney. They can go out and hire a defense expert to then say your records are terrible, or your training's terrible, or the certification's terrible, and you shouldn't rely on it. But I'm going to tell you, as a career prosecutor, I lived this whole scenario. I would have 4 or 5 or 6 reliability hearings on a dog a year.
Wow.
And they're long. They take 4 hours in an afternoon. And since Harris came out, I think I had 1 post-Harris dog reliability challenge. So if you can imagine, from doing 4 or 5 of them a year to doing 1 in the past, 10 or 12 years, before I retired a few years ago. I mean, think of this, the impact that had. It basically eliminated dog reliability as an issue, at least related to real world factors. And when you go back to training, generally training and certification is pretty solid. What they're attacking now, I tend to find, is that, and I hate to say this, but retired handlers who somebody throws a bunch of money at them, and they review like body camera footage now, and they say, oh, I can tell by, he pointed to the sky and he looked at a tree, and that's a cue. And so now they've turned, their world is now getting away from reliability into now analyzing footage to make up some kind of gesture or blocking or whatever. I don't work a dog, but I know all the buzzwords, and they'll be quite honest with you, it's almost laughable if you know the world. Now, I can see where if you're a judge that doesn't know dogs, or you're a John Q. Public, and you probably convince them that, he turned his hips, 30 degrees to the right, and the dog looked at him, and that must have been the cue, And so now the footage scenario is the experts don't really challenge. They're going to look at them, but the records are generally honest and trustworthy, and they're there. So now they go to footage, and they start talking about footage and gestures and blocking and cueing. So, you just got to be aware that now that if you're working a dog on body camera, that that's what they're going to try to pick apart.
Yeah. What about the Jardines case?
Yeah, Jardines, we lost 5-4. Believe it or not, it was the 4 liberal justices and Justice Scalia, who is a very conservative judge, but I don't want to bore your listeners too much. But the bottom line is there's 3 basic rights of privacy if you boil it down to its scenario. The reason why you can do dogs on a car sniff is because the car is the lowest right of privacy. So if your dog is well trained and maintained and alerts, you can search. Then somewhere in the middle, let's say that's a 3, let's just say. Then around a 5 or a 6 is your right of privacy in your person. And then above that is your highest right of privacy. That's where you get the acronym like king or queen of the castle. That's your house.
You're talking about expectation of privacy.
Well, they're your right of privacy.
Right of privacy. Okay.
So it's, low for cars, medium for your person, and high for your house. Well, Scalia was a really staunch, even though he was a conservative, he was a staunch right of your house type of person.
Right.
And he thought basically Jardines was, if I cut through it really quick for your listeners, was like a random call-in tip. They sent like 2 detectives and a dog handler out to investigate, and they would, I hate to say it, was in Miami, and what they would do, they'd get like 40 tips a weekend.
Yeah.
So they would say, okay, you 2 detectives and this dog do these 10 houses. The second set of detectives and that dog, you do these 10, and they'd go out like on a Saturday night, and each of the groups would do 10 houses, and there'd be 4 groups.
So would they be sniffing the house?
Yeah, they'd walk up the driveway at 3 a.m.
Okay.
They'd sniff the front door and maybe the garage door. If the dog alerted or gave final, because some people like different terminology,
Right.
but then they would further investigate that house and look at factors and sit on the house and develop more factors and then it would eventually, they'd pull trash, they'd watch, hand to hands, 10 of them between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. and they all looked like drug transactions, and they'd write a search warrant once they developed, but they would focus on the ones that the dog would hit on, and they would not necessarily abandon, but they would put in the back drawer the tips of the houses where the dog didn't alert.
So they're looking at it, a dog alert, as reasonable suspicion, not necessarily probable cause. Would that be a safe way to
probably
say?
not even reasonable suspicion, because it was just a factor
Okay.
based upon, it was like, say, 1 of 5 factors in a search warrant.
Okay.
So you would have a dog alert. Let's say, and of course, you had a random tip already.
Right.
So that's a very low standard. And then you'd sit on the house, and let's say you saw the hand-to-hand, 10 of them in an hour or something like that. So then you write those down, and then you pull trash, and maybe you find some residue on baggies, or you find marijuana grow, PCB pipe, and a book on Ralph's Guide to Growing Marijuana and Miracle Grow in the garbage. And then maybe you do a traffic stop on somebody, or because a lot of them were on vacant houses and they were grow houses, and they'd sit on the house, and ironically, the person tending the grow would show up Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 5 to 7, and there would be nobody there at the house for the rest of the week. Then a lot of the topic I found in South Florida was they would pull, we have Florida Power and Light, whatever your power company is, and they'd pull the house to the right, and it would have 3,000 watts a month. And the house to the left, with a family of 4, and that would have 3,000 watts a month. And the grow house in the middle, which nobody lived at, and the guy was there for 2 hours, 3 days a week, that would have 10,000 watts a month. So you put all that together, then they would write a search warrant. But the dog alert was one of the factors.
Yep.
And then that would lead to probable cause. And the court said basically the sniff was not a search. And the courts always recognize that a sniff is not a search. But what the court invented, because Scalia didn't want police officers going up at 3 a.m., walking across the front yard and just walking up there and utilizing the dog. So I'll be honest with you, they invented the trespass. So that when the dog, although he's 40 feet away in the front yard, and the dog and the officer walk up there, as soon as the paw and the first foot got on the first blade of grass in the front of the yard.
Inside the curtilage.
Yeah, that would be the curtilage. They felt that they invented the term that you were up there for a criminal investigative purpose, and the dog then became a criminal investigative tool, and therefore it wasn't that the sniff became a search, is that you and your dog and the other narcotics detective were not legally present to do the sniff, because you had become a trespasser. So we invented in South Florida what we used to now call dog warrants. And instead of doing the dog first, we did all that stuff we talked about, pulling trash, doing surveillance, pulling power, all that kind of stuff. Nobody living there, talking to the mailman, talking to the trash man. Yeah, like trash is never out, but like once a month, Well, clearly nobody's living there, but your wattage is triple what your neighbors are. And then we would write a warrant to ask the judge just to go on the curtilage to sniff the house.
Wow.
So we're not going in. We just want permission to be on the grass, on the driveway, and our judges were signing them. And then all you do is you marry the first warrant with the dog sniff factor, and you put the dog sniff in last. We were calling them dog warrants, and then the judge would say, "Oh, you've got factor A, B, C, and D, and the dog hit last night." Then they would re-sign the warrant with the dog in it, and then in the house you go. And we never got suppression issues after that because we did instead of doing the dog first, we did the dog last.
Do you think they would give that warrant absent of the dog sniffing alert? With all the investigative...
It would depend.
Right.
Because it's tough to say, you and I talking, because you'd have to say, Ted, I have these 3 factors, and I would say, that might be a little weak. But then you may say, Ted, but I have these 5 factors.
Yeah.
And I would say, you know what, there's a fair chance the judge might sign that.
Yeah.
So it would depend on, because like I told you the first time in Jardines there was an anonymous tip.
Yes.
But what if the tip came from a reliable, confidential informant?
That
Your anonymous tip factor, which is like, say, helps you 1 to 5%, but your reliable CI tip may help you 25%.
Yeah.
So it would just depend on what the factors are, and if it came from a concerned citizen, like the neighbor across the street who wants to be anonymous, that's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what the factors are and where they fall on the spectrum of low reliability but still helps or high reliability. I'm going to tell you, if a concerned citizen calls in that has no criminal history and all that, who they are, but they want to remain anonymous, that's different than anonymous because you know who they are.
Right.
But you're not putting their name in a warrant. But you're saying a concerned citizen, a neighbor in the neighborhood. Well, hell, that could be 100 people. But is a concerned citizen, and they gave us this tip. They have the highest degree of reliability for search warrants.
Interesting.
So if you had that, but only 3 other factors, you might get in. But if you turn that into a purely anonymous, I have no idea who's given the tip, and 3 other factors, you may not get in.
So in the Jardines case, it was a single family home. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So how does it change if it's an apartment complex that's open to the public?
Well, it doesn't change the factors, other than it's probably a lot harder to pull trash. Because you're shoving it, you live on the 10th floor and you're shoving it down a chute that's going to fall into the general scenario. But maybe they put mail in there. There's really honestly is how hard the detective wants to work as far as how much you want to do. But that obviously would be harder. But if they just threw their trash in a bag and there's nothing in there to identify that bag goes to that apartment, that doesn't help you. But if I throw it in there with my power and light bill and my cable bill and I don't know a check that was just torn in half with my address on it or something, and it identifies that trash coming back to that apartment, that's certainly going to help you identify there, and what's in the trash could help you. So it's more difficult because it's just easier to do a house. Plus, how many grow condos do you really have? You need 4 bedrooms and you need to make money. I mean, you're not really going to have a 4-bedroom condo that's going to cost you $5,000 in rent a month. The theory for them is if anybody out there in podcast land has ever owned a house and had a mortgage, what had happened when the Jardines period, because the case is a little old, but it was there during the mortgage crisis. And Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, who all live in Chicago and New York or whatever, and they were not in the landlord business because people would default on their mortgage. And then here's the kicker. The bad guy, the grow house guy, would sign up for, ready for this? I hope you're not driving. If you're driving, pull over. They would sign up for an interest-only loan.
An interest-only loan.
So just think about it. Everybody out there paying a mortgage, you're paying a mortgage because eventually 20 years, 30 years from now, you're going to owe nothing and you're going to owe your house 100%.
Yeah.
But if you only pay the monthly interest, which is the profit for the bank, and you never cut down your principal, you'll never own your home.
Right.
So, but the bad guy didn't care. He's not interested in being a homeowner. He's interested in being a pot grower.
Right.
So as long as he made the cheapest payment he could, the $435.
That's all he cared about.
That's all he cared about, because that's what they make. You pay a $1,000 mortgage, And and on top of that, it's the interest payment, which is, let's say, $400. That's what the bank likes. Wow. The $1,000 comes off the principal.
Right.
But if you're not paying any principal because you never want to own the home, you're like renting from the bank for $400.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lot cheaper to rent a 4-bedroom house for $400 interest only. Then there is no such thing as interest only condos. Right. So. Needless to say, it'd be tougher to do that. In an apartment, the same. Plus, you have too many civilians walking around. Too many people could smell it when they walk by. Right. It's just not advantageous as a bad guy to have close quarter grow houses. So it just doesn't make sense a lot.
So just to be clear, let's say it's not marijuana, it's something else. You would still want the sequence of events to be the hard investigation to happen first before the dog deployment. Yeah. Correct? Even in an apartment situation where it's kind of open, it's a breezeway that's open to the public, that's easily accessible.
Right. You just got to make sure that's the key factor, that you're out in that breezeway, common hallway area where the pizza guy gets to go, the UPS guy gets to go. You probably have a neighbor that lives at the edge, although the 10th apartment down the walkway. Well, he or she gets out of the elevator and passes 9 other doors till they get to theirs. Well, if they have the right to walk down that breezeway or common hallway, so does a police officer and a dog, because they're not on that green grass of curtilage, because they're where a public access area where everybody else could be. So that differentiates a sniff from that location versus the porch or the driveway or something.
Yeah, perfect. Let's transition to talk about hits. We are here in 2024. We're here in New Orleans. Is this your first time in New Orleans? Is this
for hits?
Yes.
Yes.
So, give us an idea of the inception of hits. Why is hits a thing? What was the idea behind it?
Well, this is our either 19th or 20th year. And it goes all the way back to, I won't bore you with it, but that statistical analysis factor that grew in Florida. Yeah. And Andy Wyman and I got together because we had to start doing motions to suppress. Right. And he had one, I was the prosecutor, and he was and a lot of other handlers in my county. So we actually had a kumbaya meeting with like 40 handlers from my county with different agencies and saying, hey, this is a problem. This is an issue. You need to make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's and doing statistical analysis and everything. But Andy and I got together and said, this is crazy. So we started fighting it. And then we were progressing along with, the Harris scenario for many years. It didn't happen quickly. I mean, there was 5 years of litigation or so throughout Florida, then, begging the United States Supreme Court, and that opinion took, 18 months to 2 years to come out, and, things aren't that quick. And it's not easy. I've left this out. It's not easy to get to the United States Supreme Court. I'm just going to throw this out there so your listeners can have an idea. They only hear 1.8% of the cases that they're requested to hear. And I don't want to get into social justice or anything, but if you think of all the social issues that they're requested to hear, all the death penalty cases where somebody's claiming this method of electrocution or injection or whatever the method is, it's cruel and unusual, and we want you to hear my case about that violates the death penalty standards for this. All those things that they all hear. If whether you're a Trump or a Biden guy, I'm not getting into politics, but if you fight an election and you want to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court and they hear it, that counts into that 1.8%. So you're talking about hey, Supreme Court, we'd like you to hear this issue, and lawyers write briefs, and it's important, and these are the issues, and they go, okay, we read 100 of them today, we're going to hear 2.
What do you think of? What was it about both the Jardines case and the Florida v. Harris case that, I know you can't speak for them, but why do you think it got to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it's easy to figure out dog sniffing houses. Okay. Although we lost 5-4, I think it was you're dealing with the highest right of privacy in a home, right? And then you're charging somebody with a crime. Yeah. So that one intellectually I grasp. I don't agree with the result, but I intellectually grasp why they heard it. Right. And then dog reliability was just a national issue because you're talking about, I don't know, I've heard many different numbers, but there's like 50,000 dog teams in the United States, whether that's true or not, or more or less, but let's just say it is. So you're talking about an issue that's going to impact 50,000 dog handlers. Yep. So on that level, dog reliability is going to impact everybody related to your bomb dog, because it's just an odor. Drug dog, and there are 5 odors or wherever you are now, but it's multiple odors that they do, and it impacts everybody getting arrested related to finding the drugs. It was such an important issue related to search and seizure. If the dogs weren't reliable, it's going to put a lot of dog handlers out of business.
Yeah, of course.
And luckily, they realized the importance of it and the significance, and that most dog handlers do it right, and they work hard at doing it right, and they're there all for the right reasons, and that the dogs that are well trained and maintained are reliable. So, thinking about a 9-0 opinion, that was when the court does something 9-0. They're really, to be honest with you, in the intellectual world of being a lawyer, and I don't mean that in a snobby context, they do send signals out that, to all the judges in the United States, this was 9-0, so follow it, and that is the law. And there is no weasel room, because you got Jardines was 5-4.
Yeah.
You can intellectually now have an argument because one person voted one way.
Right.
You would swing the whole opinion. Not if it's 9-0.
No, not at all.
So if it's 9-0, even the liberal judges on a conservative issue are agreeing. And again, I don't want to get into politics, but like when there was, 9 states that said Trump couldn't be on the ballot, and they went 9-0, saying everybody has a right to run.
Of course, yeah.
You don't vote for him if you don't like him.
Right.
Whatever, but everybody has a right to run.
Of course.
And even Sotomayor, very liberal, intellectual judge, nice lady, she jumped in on a 9-0 opinion. Everybody has a right. And that's the court signaling to everybody, liberal, independent, conservative, moderate, whatever, all the state judges and the state Supreme Courts, people have the right to run. If you're Joe Knucklehead or Jane Knucklehead, you have the right to run.
Right.
If you're the most popular person in the country, you have a right to run. And no 7 people in a state should say the people don't get the right to vote.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the significant, wherever you fall in the political spectrum, they're coming out and saying 9-0, you have the right, the people have the right to vote.
Yep.
And if they want to reject him or her, they'll reject them at the voting box.
Absolutely. So it's safe to say, I guess, that those 2 cases helped the inception of HITS. Is that a safe assumption?
HITS was there because we created it because we saw the issue, and you needed to start educating people that, right now in Florida and across the country, people were using the Florida cases to say, error ratio, false alert, and so we started a company to go out there because you needed to educate people across the country. And of course, when you then win, that vaults you into a different scenario. Now you not only did you win, you got to go out and teach what the case actually now stands for.
Yeah.
And so Harris was a big victory for every dog handler. And so if you ever see me out in public, you can buy me a drink because I take credit for that. And,
as you should.
And it was a long battle. And then, so that vaulted that. So then, and then HITS grew because we started off in Orlando at an off-market hotel saying we've got to start fighting the good fight and educating handlers. And then we were like 123 handlers at our first HITS, and we're over 1,200 here in Orlando.
So you've grown multitudes of 10.
Sure.
You've done it. What do you attribute the success? Because now, here 2024, you have 1,200 handlers here.
We try real hard. And of course, I'm a biased person because I lecture and participate in the 1/3 ownership of the HITS product. But initially there was 4 of us, 3 handlers and myself, and now it's 2 handlers and myself. And Andy Wyman and Jeff Barrett are my 2 current partners, and they care. They have a lot of friends in the industry. They're respected in the industry. I'd like to think that I'm respected in the legal side of the industry. Our motto is, you've been there, we've been there too. And we try to really uphold that motto for the handler that comes, because we know what you went through and what you're going through. And my 2 partners have worked dogs for over 30 years. And we know that we want to vary our topics. We want to vary our speakers. We want to, open it up to supervisors. And we have supervisor classes and nutrition classes and jail. There's jail dog people out there, and they don't get a lot of attention. And there's dog food people. Of course, and there's the standard patrol, narcotics, and bomb dogs. And maybe bomb dogs sometimes don't get as much attention as the narcotics and the patrol. And we try to bring it, our motto, and I think you'll find it different than a lot of our competitors, is we bounce this around the country. Like you said, we've been around, let's say, 19 years. That's our first time in New Orleans. We take it to a different city. We were in Phoenix and then Orlando before that, and then we were out 2 years for COVID. Next year, we're going to be going to Dallas in August of 2025.
Thank God.
But, we move it around the country. We've been to L.A., we've been to Denver, we've been to Seattle, we've been to Washington, D.C., we've been to Chicago, we've been to St. Louis, we were in Louisville, Kentucky. We've done the state of Florida, Jacksonville, and Orlando a couple of times. We've been in Dallas before. So we move it around the country because, if you're a West Coast handler, it may be easier for you to get to Phoenix than it is to New Orleans. So if we move it around the country, and maybe your department, and I'm not faulting departments, can say, "Oh, you went to HITS last year."
Yeah.
But if you went to Phoenix last year and you couldn't make it to New Orleans, maybe your department thinks Dallas is a little geographically closer and maybe a little better or closer to a drive.
Yeah.
Or if we were to hit Denver, and they say, "Oh, you went to Phoenix." Now we went. We're in, let's just say hypothetically, Orlando and St. Louis. And now I'm back out closer to you, like 2 years now. HITS can rotate back geographically, maybe desirable. Maybe you can drive now, and departments will send you there. Plus, as a vendor, what greater benefit is to come to the show, and I bring, I don't know, wish I knew more than that, but 60% of my handlers that are here next year will be new handlers that haven't been in 3 or 4 years.
Wow, yeah.
So I'm bringing to a new customer base
Right.
to my vendors, because if I'm always in Nashville or I'm always in Vegas every year and I have 20 speakers and 17 of them were the guys that have been there for 2 or 3 years in a row, what benefit is that to the handler and what benefit is it to the vendor? Because they're seeing the same people and they're hearing the same lectures.
Yeah.
Now, we're not perfect. I lecture every year. You're stuck with me because I own 1/3 of the business. But we do make a pretty good effort to say like 50% of our speakers rotate around.
Yeah.
And so you always have the ability. You may see the same person in New Orleans that you see in Dallas, but I would say 50% of our people that are going to be speaking in Dallas are not here in New Orleans. And it's nice to pat us on the back that we have such a good reputation that a lot of the quality speakers that people like to hear respect us and know that we're trying to do the right thing and present a good product. Dick Van Leenen, he doesn't lecture very much in the United States. I don't believe you can find him in 2024 in the United States anywhere, but he's here in New Orleans from Aruba because he was one of the master trainers for patrol and stuff out of the Netherlands. And he now lives in Aruba, and I'm not sure that you're going to find Dick anywhere else in the United States.
Very cool.
Armin Winkler, excellent handler. He's very choosy about where he goes and what he does because he holds himself to a high standard and he holds the conference to a high standard.
Yep.
So if, Armin's very choosy. You may find him at a conference here or there, but he's not like the guy that you're going to hear 7 times in the United States that bounces around. You may find Armin at a big conference twice a year. And on a smaller level, he does classes and stuff for 30 or 40 people. But he'll come here for us because we do the best we can do to do that. And we try to vet our speakers out. And we're welcome to have new people. So if you're out there listening and you feel that you've got the credentials and the experience and you can bring a new topic to us and you can give us a couple people that have heard you speak, we're very anxious to have new people to do new things and test you out. But we're tough. We have plenty of people that come and they get bad reviews. And we just don't invite you back because there's no sense of having.
Of course.
I have 1,200 people that have paid time and effort to be here, I want them to get their bang for their buck.
Of course. You can make the argument you service the industry as a whole by going to different places in the United States.
Sure.
Not just regionally selecting the same place
Well,
over and over again.
I can tell you early on, we trial and error. We made plenty of mistakes that we learned from. But like a city like Louisville, when we were a little smaller, say we had back then 600 or 700 people come.
Yeah.
But you look at Louisville as a driving radius, it's within 8 hours of St. Louis, Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Atlanta, Nashville, Memphis. I mean, think of all those places I just said, and if you're a handler, your department can say, oh, you'll drive 7 hours? Okay. And so you think, wow, why would you go to Louisville? But if you do it intellectually, I probably hit more people that can attend Louisville than I do here in New Orleans.
Right,
because if you 8 hour driving radius, I hit a lot of handlers that way. No. So, some of it's intellectual thinking about it. Now I can't go back to Louisville because I'm 1,200 people and I can't find a hotel and a ballroom and 5 classes that'll fit me in that town.
Yeah.
But you think about things like that.
So in 20 years, roughly, you've grown so much. Where do you see hits in 5 years? Have you thought that far?
Well, because I'm 58. So
you're still young.
For all the women out there, in case you want to.
Are you single?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm single.
I
have 2 dogs and a house that's paid for.
Oh, even better.
So at some point in time, I'm going to be honest, there's going to be a point in time in my 60s where, I don't know, 65, and I get Medicaid, Medicare, that I may say enough is enough. But I probably got 5 or 6 years in me left. But we grow about 100 handlers or so a year.
That's significant.
And I hate to say it, with the economy and prices and hotels, we try real hard. We're $139 a night at a Hyatt Regency in New Orleans, which I'm not sure that you're going to find that rate on just the average boring New Orleans day.
Yep.
So we try real hard. We are $159 in Dallas for a hotel at a Hyatt Regency. Mm-hmm. So it's a super nice hotel. So we try to do that because we realize the departments are spending money. Maybe you're coming out of your own pocket.
Yeah.
And we try to make it as economical as possible for the handler. And it's getting tougher every year to find the price point that we try to get.
It's tough. But, I mean, honestly, the quality's there. The total value that you're getting for coming here is ridiculous. I'm just speaking as someone who's a vendor of yours and someone who's an attendee who is very much focused on continuing to be a student and mastering my craft as much as I can. The quality of instructors are always awesome.
Well, we want you to have fun too. Yeah. I mean, you play hard, you work hard. Mm-hmm. So we have about $60,000 to $80,000 of raffle gifts that are going to go out here over the next 3 days. Mm-hmm. We have a night tonight is a 1 hour open bar for the vendor area, so you can come and.
But your administration's great.
Oh yeah, about that. Well, but even your ministry, even your chiefs, they were cops at one point in time, riding around in a black and white and having people yell at them. Uh-huh. So there's a scenario where they want to treat the men and women of their department, and if the SWAT guys and gals go to their SWAT schools and the economic crime guys go to their check writing schools and fraud schools, why shouldn't a handler go to a handler canine school?
For sure.
And you got to have a little bit of fun. Like I said, it's an hour, and a raffle night where you can win prizes and things. And again, there's an open bar for an hour during that. So and you got to go to a fun city.
Yeah.
I mean, who wants to go to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, or something like that? And if you're the mayor of Sheboygan, please don't send me an email. But you got to go to a place where people can fly in and make it convenient, and there's a little bit of a social aspect to it, so that you can get out of the hotel, for an hour or two. And
I can imagine. I mean, you and I had conversations off air about all the behind the scenes things that happens that no one will ever know about. But you put on your shoulders, and I can just say personally, I really appreciate the time and the effort that you put into getting it right. Because, man, all those attributes, not a lot of cities fit that mold. And to find the right city at the right time at the right price, and So many things you have to consider.
You wouldn't know if I told you the 79 components to putting on a 4-day seminar. You would not believe me. And to give you an idea of how much we care, Andy's doing, catering and where the bars are going to be set up and where the food and beverage platforms are today, because that's all happening. I'm running around getting vendors and booths and helping our gym's equipment people, move in cars. And I got to deal with the fire marshal, and I got a police detail guy coming or gal at 7 to 7. Wow. And I got to do little things like hand out cards and hand out stamp cards and little things for our raffle gifts. We have a bingo card to get stamped, and there's a lot of Jeff Barrett. He's over there. Registration, getting people that if you spelt your name wrong on your ID, he'll add an S to the end of your name and remake it. And if we're telling you, you didn't pay, you got to go over to him, and he'll say, no, we're wrong. You did pay. Go back over, and we'll get you fixed.
Yep.
So we're all hands on. And of course, just to say this, and I hope this makes your podcast, we've got 7 or 8 really good friends of ours that come help us. And we could not do it without those 7 or 8 men or women that really come in and help us out. I mean, they're down there handing out badges and padfolios and schedules and kind of pointing out what's going on this night and what's going on that night. And there's absolutely no way that I couldn't do it without our 6 or 7 or 8 friends that help us out every year. So on that level, it's not a 3-person band. It's we got a brass contingent and a saxophonist, and there we got everybody in there. It's a whole band coming on. We're KC and the Sunshine Band. We got 11 players. I'm just not the KC. They're the Sunshine.
So Ted, I have two more questions for you, and we'll wrap it up. Number one is if you look at this camera here and give advice to the brand new handler that's taking on a dog for the first time, and he's going to take on this canine world. He can be pulled in a million different ways and a different trainers and methodologies and all that stuff. How would you communicate the best advice you could possibly give to that man?
I'll give you maybe 3 good points just to wrap it up. First, make sure that you are in it to win it. Mm-hmm. And that counts besides you, your wife, your kids, the whole home life. If you don't have a dog, you're taking a dog home. If you have a pet, you're going to be taking another dog home that may or may not be compatible. Yep. So the first thing is, it's not just signing up and I'm competing with 5 men or women to be a handler, that you've got all the background that you're in it to win it, because your wife's got to support it, or your kid's got to support it, or your other pet's got to be acclimated to it. Yeah. And you got to have a whole home life, because you're going to be called out. It's not your normal 9-to-5 cop job.
Preach, brother, preach.
And then the second side of it is you got to want to put the work in. You got to want to train weekly. You got to want to come to conferences like this. You got to be flexible in your thinking, because there is no one perfect way or methodology to train a dog. You're probably going to see 2 or 3 different speakers give you 2 or 3 different methods. Mm-hmm. They're all going to get you to the same place. So listen to the handlers and trainers that you respect in your area, but be open-minded that it's not necessarily the only way to do it. And maybe for your dog, not for you, but maybe training method A that your agency's using, or your trainer's using, or your sergeant's used to, because your dog is a little quirky. Maybe method B for this type of deployment is better for your dog. Yeah. Doesn't make A wrong. It just makes B better for your dog. Just so there is no right or wrong. Well, there probably is right or wrong ways to train your dog, but there are 4 or 5 perspectives out there that are all quality.
Absolutely.
That will get your dog to the same place. So we're not fostering you have to do A. We foster theories that you can do A, B, or C. Find out what's good for you and your dog. And don't be closed-minded. It's only A, only A, only A. And all the B and C people are fucking nuts. I don't know. Can you say fucking nuts on the podcast?
Yes, absolutely.
So be flexible in your thinking and your training. Yes. Because you may want to come here and it may say, you know what? Now I figured out, instead of choking my dog and helicoptering him around to get him to come out, I've learned that here's a technique that somebody taught me at HITS. And if I work on that for a month, my dog may out in 10 seconds or better, or 5 seconds or better, because I've learned this methodology that I was never exposed to.
I love that.
It doesn't make choking your dog out, but, God, it makes for better TV when you don't choke or helicopter your dog.
I love that. I think it's great advice, because I don't think we should be trying to fall on different camps, either Camp A or Camp B. I think a lot of it, to some people, may be anecdotal, but it may be exactly what you need for your dog. So I think that's great. So last question for you,
Okay.
a little personal. If you can go back in time, take a time machine, and give yourself advice the first time you got in this industry, what advice would you give yourself?
Whew. I don't know what that would be. I mean, I had a good career as a prosecutor. I liked being a lawyer. So my family, believe it or not, were physicians. My dad and my two brothers. I couldn't stab the frog in biology in high school. And so, the path for science and biology was not going to be for me. And I've just been blessed with a talent to have, I think, what is a good personality. I think I'm a fairly bright individual, and I publicly speak well. So I think the teaching, the lecturing, and being a courtroom lawyer, fast on my feet, were all good components for the job where, God put me. I don't know. I'm single. So maybe if I'd met the right woman 25 years ago and had 2 kids, and I could be the soccer dad or something.
Late, Ted. No.
No.
Now.
I'm a 58-year-old curmudgeon-y man who likes being single and has 2 dogs. So, and being single also gives me a little flexibility to go out, because we do seminars, smaller seminars throughout the country.
Okay.
So we do 8 or 10 of these a year, but then we do them like in 50 people or less, and sometimes we do hands-on for like 25 dogs or something. We'll do a 3-day hands-on seminar. So I have some flexibility to do that I guess being single does help me with.
Of course.
I don't know. That would be social, but professional, I don't know. I mean, I did the United States Supreme Court. That's a good bucket list.
Pretty badass, man.
And I did teach, and I wrote a book.
Plug your book.
Well, it was Canines in the Courtroom.
That's right. Yeah, you mentioned it.
And
before.
I don't know. Maybe have a bit role in a TV series or a movie or something, because I think what I missed in life, to be honest with you, where God really shoved me in, but I took a U-turn at Albuquerque and became a lawyer, was stand-up comedy. I can't. I'm a pretty funny guy extemporaneously, but I can't write a joke to save my soul. So
it's got to be off the cuff.
Yeah, I think you get 3 beers and a shot of tequila in me, and I'm a pretty humorous guy. But to sit down and, I could never write a sitcom.
Yeah.
But I think if you gave me, and Ted, here's your script, and if you want to go off script, go right ahead, because it could be really funny. I think I would develop a couple really good one-liners in that 30-minute show.
Love it.
But that's about it. I got no regrets.
Good deal.
God's been good to me. My family's been good to me, and I like what I'm doing. So if you like what you're doing, that's 50% of the battle in the world.
For sure. Well, it's hard to speak for 1,200 handlers. I'm going to try to do it. Thanks for what you've done for our industry. Not only with hits, you've highlighted 2 very important, cases that went to the Supreme Court that you were heavily influenced in the decision. Good, bad, or indifferent. You fought for us, and that means a lot. So.
If there's prosecutors out there listening to this, take this as a learning scenario. I lost in 4 out of 5 appellate courts. I lost me in a group. It's not just me, but a group of people advocating for this position. We lost in the Florida Supreme Court. So it was a loss, and a loss over like a 4 or 5 year period. And we got to the United States Supreme Court and we won.
Yes.
So fight the fight, because if you believe in what you do, there's no harm in if you get no as an answer, find another avenue. So if it teaches me anything, legally, fight. Don't be afraid to lose.
Yeah.
I think prosecutors that are afraid to lose are doing themselves a disservice and the police community a disservice, because if I go forward, I might lose.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
You know what? As far as the dope world goes, the drug people don't get their dope back. Even if they're found not guilty, even if the judge suppresses something, they don't get their dope back.
Yep.
And if you lose, appeal it to a appellate court.
Yeah.
And if that district court on appeal says that, no, the judge was right, you screwed up on search and seizure, try to go to your Supreme Court in your state.
I love it.
And if you lose there, God, I'm telling you, go to the Supreme Court. Maybe they'll hear it, maybe they won't. But if you don't ask them to hear it, you'll never know whether you would have accomplished it or not.
I love it.
So, fight the fight, and if you lose, you lose. But sometimes you win, and you change the whole course of the world on a particular scenario. And that's what Harris really did.
I feel like it should be a movie now. I mean, it's got a lot of great plots for a great movie.
Like John Goodman would have to play me or something. So I'm not real sure that he's up for that task.
Thanks again, brother. We appreciate it, man.
Steve, thanks. It was a pleasure being here, and thanks for having us, and thanks for coming to Hits.
Of course, man. Thanks. Thank you so much for all the support you've shown us here at the Next Level Podcast. We hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Ted. He obviously is a wealth of knowledge, and we're very lucky to have him in our industry. As we move forward, we're definitely going to be pivoting to something focused more on the science and technology part of our canine industry. So scientists, chemists, animal behavioralists are all going to be on there. And dare I say, we're going to have a pretty controversial guest coming up soon as well. So thanks again for the support, and we'll see you soon.